Hey everyone, I'm Janine, and this week I'm going to show you step by step how to recreate this baby gender reveal cake. There's two cakes involved in this cake. Firstly, there's the block on the bottom, and then you've got the balloon at the top, which is also cake and filled with our gender reveal surprise. So you'll be able to recreate this at home by watching my step-by-step tutorial and be able to wow your friends at the next gender reveal party in your family. So stay tuned to find out, is it a boy or is it a girl? I'm starting with a base cake that I'm going to make into a baby block. First thing we need to do is to trim off the edges of our cake. We don't want the caramelization, like that with every layer. I'm going with 3 layers for this cake. Now I know that a true cube would be 6 by 6, but I thought that might be a tad high. Probably going to be about 6 by 4 once we've added the fillings. So the next thing I have to do is to fill every layer of cake and build it up and start a rough ganache coat. Okay, so I've drilled a 1/4 inch hole through my board. Because this is a structured cake, we're going to need that to put it over the structure in the end. So make sure that your base board has a hole drilled through the center. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to layer up these cakes and fill them with ganache in between each layer. Now I'm going to give this cake a rough ganache coat so that it is stable and we don't lose any of our crumbs outside of our ganache. So now this baby's had some time to chill out, I have to put a top board on here to make sure that we keep our edges nice and straight and sharp, and it is imperative for a square cake to do this. So I'm using my scraper to make sure that all of the edges are nice and straight and even so we get a nice square cake. Okay, now it's time to fill up this baby with ganache in between here and here. Everything in here needs to be full. Make sure that when you're using ganache to get it to the right consistency, about a peanut butter consistency. Too thick and you'll drag your cake, too thin and it'll run off the cake. Okay, and now I'm going to take my bench scraper using the bottom board and the top board as my guide and scrape off the excess ganache. Okay, now to get the elusive sharp corner on a square cake, I'm just going to quickly show you how I do it. So to get a sharp corner on a cake, I have to fill in both sides of the corner with ganache, nice and thick, and then take my scraper with some hot water, which is your friend, and scrape on both sides until the excess is away. And you need to do that with all 4 corners. So a lot of people find straight edges on square cakes really hard to achieve. The best tips I can give you is to use a top board and a base board, it's imperative. And make sure that you constantly build up the sides and scrape away, build up the sides and scrape away. If you're left with divots in between where the boards are, build it up again. You just have to persist and keep going, and don't forget that hot water and bench scrapers are your friends. Don't be too rough and you'll get there in the end. Now that we've got our edges nice and straight, it is time to remove this guide board from the top of the cake. I do that by taking a blade, putting it in hot water and just lifting up around the sides. So as you can see, we've run into a few little issues, but making cakes in heat is always a challenge. We're in Australia and we're hitting summer, so it's really, really hot here, and chocolate melts in heat. Just persist, use your fridge, and you will get there in the end. Alright, so we've finished masking our cake, and now we're on to the next step. We're going to start making some elements that are going to go on the cake that need to dry before they hit the fondant. So I'm going to add some Tylose, which is the hardening agent, to the fondant to make sure that they set up nice and firm. And then I'm going to roll out my fondant nice and thin, use a template that I've already printed, and use an X-Acto knife to cut around the template. Okay, so that's my first letter cut out. Now I'm off to cut out all the rest in exactly the same way. Okay, now that we've got the cake covered in ganache and I've let it set for a little while, it is time to cover it in fondant. You can attach your fondant using either a vegetable shortening, which is what I'm using today, or you could use water. So covering square cakes is never an easy thing, especially tall squares. The way I'm covering this cake is actually a little bit different than you'd normally cover cakes, but I'm using scissors to cut the sides. And the reason I'm doing that is because it gives you the nice sharp edges still, and we're covering it up with stuff anyway, so it won't matter. I'm going to use a couple of methods to smooth this cake out. Firstly, I'm going to use my acrylic smoothers and then my flexi smoothers like I always do to get nice sharp edges. So now that I've covered the square cake, I'm moving on to the balloon part of the cake. For half of the balloon, I'm using a Rice Krispie half sphere. Once again, don't forget to drill a hole through the center because it's a structured cake, and I'm now just going to sink a small section in here for our board to fit into. Now all we have to do is ganache that half sphere and set it aside until we're ready to use it later on. Now that that sphere is covered in ganache, we have to set about making the structure to put this cake together. I'm going to use a 1-inch MDF board that I've stuck some cleats to. Then I'm going to thread a 1/4 inch threaded rod through the center of that and attach it using nuts and washers. Now comes one of the scarier parts. We have to put our cake onto the board, which means threading it over the rod. Now that we've put our block onto the board, we're going to start decorating the block to look like a baby block. To do that, I'm using some acrylic smoothers that I'm using to make sure that the fondant stays the same width. Then I'm going to cut some stripes to put around the outside of the block and then use the letters that we made previously and put them in the center. Now that I've decorated the base cake and that's all done, we have to move on to doing the balloon cake. I'm going to show you how I put that together by mounting another board with some screws and washers, which is going to secure our base half of the sphere, and then I'll be putting another board on top of the Rice Krispie treat half of the sphere to support the cake section of our sphere. Now it's time to introduce our cake half sphere. I have to split this and put holes in it so that we've got room for our surprise gender reveal sprinkles. Now that I've mounted the cake half sphere on top, it's time to ganache this whole thing and make it look like one ball. Okay, now we've got the sphere ganache such as it is. It's a little bit rough, but that's okay. We're about to cover it with some modelling chocolate fondant mix. I make my own modelling chocolate. You can buy it, of course, but this is just 50% modelling chocolate and 50% fondant. So when you cover anything that needs seams hidden, that's exactly why I've chosen to go with modelling chocolate and fondant. Modelling chocolate tends to be a lot more forgiving. You can blend out seams just with the heat of your hands. Okay, now the sphere is covered. All we have to do is add a small decoration to the sphere, some ribbon to the pole and cover our board and we'll be done. Well, I guess that's it. The last thing we have to do is to find out if it's a boy or if it's a girl. Thanks so much again for watching. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell down the bottom so that you're informed every time I upload new content. I will see you next time, and in the meantime, don't forget, you know what to do? Go and get your cake on.